And basically we're looking at some of the challenges facing our city streets. There's a whole host of issues like sort of coping with more cyclists, coping with electric cars, the growing population, which we've already heard about, the ageing population, and I guess in London specifically, the historic constraints from the way that buildings have sort of evolved, which means that we don't have sort of a huge amount of space between them to play with. We've got 3 guests, so I'll introduce them as they come up. We're going to do a similar format to last time, so a 5-minute presentation from each, and then we'll do a Q&A afterwards. So again, if you've got any questions that sort of leaping into your mind during the talks, then make a note and we'll sort of go to you then. So our first speaker is John Dales from a company called Urban Movement. He is a traffic engineer, a transport planner, and an urban designer who's been working in these fields for almost 3 decades. Not wishing to make him feel old, he just shook his head angrily. And he advises people like Transport for London, Design Council, and Edinburgh Council. So John, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for staying. I'm a traffic engineer. I should say that early on, so it is all my fault, and I apologise for that. I'm also an urban designer, and my job is to try and work out how best to meet all the complex transport issues we have at street level. I don't know if you've ever read this book, Strap Hanger by Taras Gresko. You can't quite see, there's a chair in the way. I recommend you get it. It's a fascinating book about urban transport today and about how decision makers increasingly, mayors of major cities and so forth, are looking at public transport as not the poor man's way of getting around, but in fact an essential part of a civilized city. There's a particular quote in it which I rather liked, which is this is sometimes seen as the nirvana of urban transport. The way to save our streets is that we'll have clean, quiet cars. But as I think correctly, Taras Gresko points out, the point is that only gets us so far. All right, it might be cleaner, but there's just not enough room in cities for everyone to have their car and feel free to move around. They are, as he says, and I wouldn't say this is too much of an overestimate, a bit of a disaster for cities. And we can see why. Here's a picture of, it looks like some kind of amazing photo fit, doesn't it? But actually this exists. It's in Shanghai. I don't know if you've seen Edward Burtynsky's oil exhibit. It's a fascinating one. And the next couple of pictures are as well what provision for the car has done for our cities when we've changed streets into these great big sort of roads, mechanisms for that. This is Los Angeles. That's somebody's community down there and the roads through it. And this is the fine city centre of Houston in America. No, it's not just the roads, but the rest of the car-centric development around it, the big sheds and the spaces where nobody really wants to be unless they have a large truck to haul. Closer to home, this is actually a photograph taken many years ago on the A13, not at all far from here, about a mile due north. That's the kind of thing that roads and streets, provision for car, can do to our communities. A great big severance through the heart of our towns and cities. And this is my street, Northfield Avenue in Ealing in West London. Not so bad. Could be better, but actually quite ordinary, and successfully deals with a lot of issues in terms of where people want to be, shop, hang around, meet. It has some nice trees. It's a pleasant place to be. You can get a bus, you can cycle, drive, you can do all those things. It's not under quite so much pressure as big city centre streets are, but perhaps it points a direction we should go. And I think the thing for me in terms of thinking about streets, especially in cities, is a stat that I just checked up today, updated it. 2011, in the whole country, over 3/4 of all the journeys that people take of between 2 and 5 miles were done by a car or van, either as a passenger or a driver. And even when we get down to 1 to 2 miles, it's about 60%. Getting on for 2/3 of all journeys are taken by car. These are obviously a relatively large proportion of these could go by walking and cycling if it were safer, easier, more convenient to do so. You might say, well, we've got to carry a lot of baggage around, we've got to do that. That's all fine. But actually, supposing that 59% of all trips of 1-2 just came down to 45%, 50 even, that 9% in terms of the number of cars that it means would make a huge difference in terms of how we manage our streets. And in fact, therefore, if we make walking and cycling more attractive, we really do that. Instead of taking precious space away from cars, it could be better for everybody. The more people that do that, the better the traffic lights will work, simply put. Except this is how we tend to treat pedestrians. This is an old photograph now, and I'm glad to say that some of that guardrailing has got along. We treat pedestrians like they're sheep. They will always fit in, won't they? A car has a dimension, a bus has a dimension, even a bike has a dimension. We have to mount a certain amount of space and capacity for them. When it comes to pedestrians, who gives a toss? And I speak about somebody who represents an industry that has seen that way for far too long now. They'll fit in somehow. They'll wait. They won't wait. They'll get along. But what happens when they try and just get along is this kind of thing. This is how we treat people on bike as well, which is somebody just trying to go to work and they get killed. About one a month in London over the last few years. That's obviously one a month too many. And it doesn't have to be that way, but we're not spending or planning wisely. We should be thinking more pedestrian. It's National Walking Month. I hope you knew that. I hope you've been doing a lot of walking. It's Walk to Work Week this week. Walk to School, sorry. If you have children, I hope you're encouraging them to do that. It was Walk to Work Week last week. I've got a long way to come, but I still walked it. It was more a study tour for me, 12.5 miles alongside the A40 corridor, or as close to the A40 corridor as I could get. It was fascinating, but I just put up this infographic from Living Streets, the pedestrians charity. One part of that infographic, that 40% figure, walking is great for business. Again, somehow it gets forgotten. We all do it, we forget it. Here's a fascinating stat, a study done, I don't know if you can quite see it, in Austria. Basically shows how shopkeepers overestimate how their till receipts go home. Everybody assumes that, look at that, 58% of all my till receipts will go home in a car. It's actually 32%. Underestimating how important walking and cycling is. A similar study in Bristol showed the same. We undervalue walking. Here's a great piece of research from a variety of different London town centres. If we think about how much money on average is spent per visit by these different modes, car, train or tube, bus, walk, look what happens. Ooh, car is top of the pile. It is really impressive, isn't it, when somebody walks out of your shop and fills their boot up. But they don't come often enough. If we see how that translates when we talk about spend per week, spend per time period, walking is king. And if you look at the difference, for example, between car and cycle in the top, twice as much per trip, but then per week in terms of modes, 47 and 56, it's much closer. And if you look at some of those, if I gave you time to look at that, you'd see that basically this implies that people who walk make about 4 trips a day to the shops, whereas people who go by car make just over 1. And so overall, in terms of how important to commerce in this city walking is, it wins by a mile. And yes, we treat people on foot by dogs. When we think about cycling, we don't get it right. This was a recent report that I helped contribute to, a parliamentary inquiry from an all-party parliamentary group, and a couple of recommendations for people like me that came out of it, partly, I'm glad to say, because of what I said was, it's all very well wanting to do better for bikes, but we don't do it terribly well. We can look in other countries and we struggle. So a couple of recommendations I said was, look, we need better guidance for practitioners, but also the department needs to make sure that our hands aren't tied in the way that they are. And this is a real challenge for us, I think. I mean, I don't know if you've seen on the left there, this is the new cycling vision for London that Boris produced in April. It's March, sorry. It's really encouraging. And what's specifically encouraging about it is this is a major effort to spend a shed load of cash for a really small user group. As traffic engineers, historically, if you didn't exist in terms of numbers, we don't spend any money on you. There's a recognition, which is great, that actually we need to spend to increase the size of that particular user group. If we don't have as many people cycling, it'll be bad. So that's a good thing. On the other hand, this is another Boris-type document, which is we are going to increase the amount of cycling 400% over 10 years. But if you look behind that sounds great. 4 times, it's still only 5% of all trips that will be made by bike. That's the ambition here. 37% of people in Copenhagen go to work on a bike. If we don't get more people walking and cycling, we won't get those benefits of space and capacity release that I was talking about earlier. And another challenge for us is wonderful, the Department for Transport chucking tons of money away, not chucking it away, but about to give a lot of money for these cycle ambition bids. Cities throughout the nation being encouraged to bid for large sums of money to improve cycling. But unfortunately, as I was just talking about, if we don't have, as designers and others, the opportunity to do what we know we can do, we've seen in other countries and in part are doing in this country, by 2015, when all that money has to be spent, March 2015, we won't actually be able to do the stuff because our hands are tied by guidance and regulations. So it's a real challenge. Just one final thought. in terms of the context for this, coming back to this idea of the cars and don't believe the hype, one of the things we are always being asked to swallow is traffic growth, traffic growth. There'll be traffic growth. Population growth will mean traffic growth in terms of car growth. Even in Transport for London, where they're really trying to do the right thing here, they sit there quite petrified. Look, even if we do all that we're planning to do, that's what this slide is saying, congestion will still increase, but that's congestion based on predictions that frankly are devalued. And yet we still believe them because they're out there. The DFT models that. We're at a point now where we might well be at what people are calling peak car, which is, in cities especially, with just the amount of travel by car has changed. There are other options. We know it's not economically feasible, whatever it might be. But we are still predicting future growth. Even today, you can see the date on this. This is an article in a professional magazine. They're going to build a bridge not far from here. Is it a bridge? Yes, it is. New Thames Crossing, whatever it might be, a bridge or a tunnel. They're going to build it because the DFT is forecasting huge growth. Well, actually, 20% over 30 years isn't that huge a rate of growth. And will it happen in any case? It asks you to put a comment in. I didn't actually do this, but if I had done, I might have written something like this. You know, we're building all this stuff because of traffic growth. Well, are we going to get that traffic growth? We really do not have the confidence. I'll finish with this. This is a little diagram that shows you, if you can follow it, all the coloured lines that head up, going all the way back to 1990. This is way before the recession hit. This is what we've predicted, the Department of Transport had predicted traffic growth would be, and the black line is what has actually happened. We're still predicting it'll go on, and it just hasn't. We need to plan differently for our streets and our cities. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, John, and good to see some references to Public Enemy in the May Design Series session. Sorry, you want to get a picture of that? Yeah, I'd be interested, just a quick show of hands. Who actually knew it was National Walking Month this month? Because I didn't. Anyone? No? Well, that says something anyway. I'm not sure what, but hopefully someone will be able to elaborate. Our next speaker is Trisha Brown. She runs a consultancy called Central that develops projects and partnerships that help shape towns and cities. She can explain much better than I can, so I'll leave her to it.
I'm not going to take up my 5 minutes. Can you hear me okay? I'm not going to take up my 5 minutes explaining what I do, but what I do now. But what I have done in the past relates very much to what John is talking about. As Chief Executive of Central London Partnership, we did a lot to promote the importance of urban quality in London to make the place a good place for everyone to be in, and that notion of balance was a critical issue for us in the battle against the battle to keep London on the front foot. I'm going to talk very briefly a bit about the backstory to do with the notion of public space and public realm. I'm going to talk about the High Street Kensington effect, more in a minute, and then some issues about where I think we're lacking and what we should do more of to continue the effort to make our public spaces fantastic and innovative. Now, John has already talked about the ongoing battle of cars against pedestrians, and ever since these creatures appeared in our streets in the 1960s, we fought an ever-increasing battle to stop our roads looking like this. This was Regent Street in the late 1990s. And this was Trafalgar Square in the late 1990s. And along come organisations such as ourselves, Central London Partnership, and other organisations who tried to do things to, including John's previous company, Urban Initiatives, who tried to do things to design people into the cities rather than have them as an afterthought. And we worked strenuously to take away the car-dominated environment in parts of central London, including Trafalgar Square. And I can't claim all the glory for that, but I can claim some of the glory for the pedestrianisation of the north side of Trafalgar Square, to turn it into a beautiful place rather than a car-dominated traffic roundabout where you literally did risk accident every single day trying to get across the roads. we started to do small things in around that period as well, like take the car parking out of Somerset House car park and turn it into a place which is usable by lots of different age groups and lots of different people with lots of different interests, from cinema groups, from craft fairs and ice rinks, or just people getting wet in the fountains throughout the summer. And slowly and incrementally, we started to turn London into a much more people-friendly city. So whilst I agree with John, there's a lot to do, there's actually quite a lot of really good work done along the way. These are images from a study that Central London Partnership and Transport for London commissioned from the urban quality specialist Jan Gale in 2003-2004. And he pointed out that even in Regent Street, the premier shopping street of London, there weren't any seats, and sad to say there still aren't any seats in Regent Street. So if you want to sit in lots of parts of central London, you had to go and buy a coffee or buy a drink and sit in a cafe. So what we tried to do is arrest that situation and bring in a sense of privilege and a sense of right and a quality space for people. And we worked alongside the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea on the very famous High Street Kensington scheme, which looked at decluttering of street furniture along the type of issues that John's talked about, the rationalisation of decluttering the streets, rationalisation of street furniture, and getting standard street paving throughout. The one on the left is an image before, the one on the right is afterwards. So you can see it's a much more rational space. That's a before, that's an after in High Street Kensington. And this is two images after, and this was an award-winning scheme, and many people came to visit it and emulate it. And I give you the proposition today, we are suffering from too much High Street Kensington effects, as we have cloned our streets up and down the country, where they all look very similar in terms of street furniture and pavers, and we've forgotten to design in difference and respond to localities and the sense of place. And we talk a lot about placemaking, but we're not necessarily really articulating what a place and a different place looks like. Now, we have done that in some parts of London and some parts of the world. This was Exhibition Road before. This is Exhibition Road afterwards. This is Exhibition Road during the Olympics with the street festival. But that cost £30 million, and we don't always have £30 million in our back pocket to spend on high streets. We've also spent a good amount of money responding to the traffic balance conditions mentioned before in Oxford Circus with the Oxford Circus Diagonal. But we don't really look at what our places mean to different people, and this is a fantastic initiative I think we need to emulate in Copenhagen, called Superkillen by Danish architectural practice BIG, where they have through a significant process of consultation, worked with local communities across many different ethnic groups, and they've designed spaces, and this is just one of them, that recognises the homes and the communities that the people originally came from, even though they're now very much Copenhageners. There is something for all of them, and the space is used by a much greater demographic, from young and from old, from every different ethnic minority uses the space. Meanwhile, in Lyon, a 30-year programme of public space improvement has also recognised the importance of working with artists in order to design in beauty and quality. And every car park that they create has an artist that works with them. And this is the car park under Place de la Célestine, which is being capped and turned into the plaza that you've just seen. And this has an amazing parabolic mirror at the bottom, and me and lots of other urbanists go and visit it in Lyon simply to look at the beauty and wonder at the quality of this car park. But the most important thing is it's taken cars off the street which has then given people the chance to turn that previous car parking space to good quality public realm and creating a walking and cycling environment to shift that modal shift right across. Now, just moving very briefly on to across the pond, I look at awe and respect with our friends in Times Square and the risk and experimentation they took in taking out a massive amount of traffic from Broadway and replacing it with a temporary scheme, a temporary pedestrianisation scheme, to see what the effect would have on the traffic. And what happened was that spend went up, retail spend went up, visitor numbers increased, air quality improved, and traffic accidents decreased dramatically. And as a consequence of this experiment, there has been a permanent scheme being designed and is currently being implemented to replace this rather tatty piece of public realm that just proved the point that New Yorkers could live with a semi-pedestrianised Times Square, and this is the Snow Hatter scheme which is being implemented even as we speak. Meanwhile, San Francisco, this is in San Francisco, a pop-up pavement cafe, a temporary scheme, a little skip that can get delivered across neighbourhoods to reclaim some space temporarily when they may not need that parking space. And something's gone missing, so I'm a bit confused, sorry. There should have been some other slides there, so bear with me. And all of these things lead me to my final point, really, which is that we have a tendency, because we're led by traffic engineers who design big schemes in Britain, to put in a very long-term scheme. And what I would like us to do, and especially the design community, is to think about doing things on the hoof, on the fly, very quickly, trial it and take it out if it doesn't work, and just keep looking at spaces and how they can work and how they can change over a period of time. These are the lost slides. This again is in New York, where groups of retailers get together and put in some summer-side seating, taking away from car parking in the summertime. They're taken indoors by the retailers during the winter months when no one wants to sit outside. But for the summer months, you have extra seating, and that's another example. New York has done a lot to actually arrest its own lack of provision of seats, and I think we could definitely take a leaf out of their book in terms of looking at places, looking at where people can work, take more of a centre stage, and providing wonderful places to be. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Patricia. Just a quick housekeeping note. After our final speech, I'm probably going to just go straight into the audience Q&A because we're running sort of a bit behind. So it's okay. It was both of you. So if you do have any questions, then just think about them and we'll sort of hit it straight away. Our final speaker is Paula Hurst from accountancy firm Mazars. She's head of regeneration there, and she's also held senior roles at bodies including the Olympic Delivery Authority and the Greater London Authority. So she's well versed again in all these issues. So Paula, there you go.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? Jolly good. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. One of the focuses of this discussion is about the future of our cities, which I'm going to encourage you to think about. I don't have any slides, so this is about provoking a number of questions in your mind about what the future holds and what that means for design at street level in our cities. What we're seeing is that over 50% of world's populations now live in cities. Within Europe, that's over 70%, and it's just set to increase. So what we have is cities whereby the size is increasing, but also the density, which creates quite some interesting challenges when you're thinking about how you can fit more people into any one place, but at the same time as reducing the number of resources that we use. So both in terms of waste, water, but particularly carbon emissions. And what I'm going to encourage you to think about is the role of technology and how that comes into play when you're thinking about the design of our streets and our cities. You've all got, I'm assuming, some form of mobile phone. How many of you have a smartphone? You just raise your hand. Yeah, basically everybody, right? So, and how many of you used that smartphone to figure out how to get here today? Okay, so about half of you, yeah? So what we're seeing is people are changing the way that they move, but also how they live their lives. And the impact of that technology on design, I think, is something which is really important, but is often not considered. So, for example, we spent some time talking about cycling and transportation. So now we can find out exactly when the next bus is going to go. We know when the next tube's going to go. If you can imagine going into a shop in your local high street and then that being flashed across the window as you were leaving, could also tell you whether or not there was a bicycle available or not. So this isn't happening at the moment in many places, but in other cities around the world it certainly is. And what some of the trials going on in other European cities are looking at actually having those in every home. So rather than just having your kitchen, your bathroom, you also have an entire ICT connection going on, which allows you to understand when you can leave your house in order to be able to make sure that you make that transport connection. So that's I think it's got quite a lot of implications for one, how much time people spend waiting for transport, but also what they do in the meantime and how we plan and arrange these things. By 2050, within Europe at least, we won't have any fossil fuel cars anymore. They'll all be electric vehicles. Electric vehicles need charging. That means they need charging points not just on the street but also in the home. Now that has implications obviously for the design of buildings and the design of the space in and around outside. We're also moving towards needing to be much more intelligent in terms of how we use energy. To move towards a two-way system. So what that means is rather than just energy coming to your house, it's responsive. So appliances within the home will need to be responsive, fridges automatically going off at night, etc. But you start to think about having appliances with interconnect with our energy system. That implies a much greater degree of flexibility in terms of how our buildings are designed and how people might use them internally as well, and how they interface with the street. Barcelona is very interesting. Barcelona have implemented an open data platform. So what that means is they've got Wi-Fi publicly available throughout most areas of the city. You can walk around and find out information about public services, information about cultural events or activities that are going on. What you find is that people hang around and look on their phones rather than going home to perhaps look something up. So how people move around public spaces can be influenced by whether or not you're providing them with access to get online within those cities. And the other, don't worry about that. I don't know how to turn that off, so just leave that for you to look at. But the other key area is around waste. And traditionally, we've had to build in quite significant infrastructure into our buildings in order to be able to allow, particularly for large waste trucks, to get down the streets and so on. If we move towards having a much more intelligent waste system, for example in Sweden, so vacuum pack systems and so on, that changes the design of our buildings, but it also fundamentally can change the design of our streets, because many streets are only designed to have certain capacity in order to be able for some of those trucks to go down. But as a couple of thoughts in particular around the street level, I'm going to encourage you to think about high streets. So the moment we're seeing a massive reduction in the number of retail units, so the number of shops, and it's likely to continue to go down as people shop more and more online. Now, there's a big drive in terms of UK policy debates for those buildings to be turned into houses. At the same time, though, we are fundamentally seeing a shift in how people work. So people are more working from from their mobile devices. You don't need a computer at work anymore. You can just get up your laptop or your mobile phone and sit anywhere. So one of the things that might happen with our high streets, which I think is quite interesting, is that we see a change from retail, so from people shopping, to working on their high street, which then has quite a significant difference in terms of how those buildings interface with at the street level. So all I wanted to do really within 5 minutes was just to get you to start to think about the impact of technology, the impact of being able to access the internet everywhere you go, and what that means in terms of public open spaces and our high streets, particularly around where people work and move and how they get there. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Could I now invite all our three speakers up to take a chair on the stage? If anyone has any questions, just stick your hand up and we'll sort of get a mic out to you somehow. And if you don't, then I'll ask a question myself. We've got about 15 minutes, so if there is something you want to ask, then do get in there because it'll go very quickly. I was interested in what Patricia was saying about sort of short-term uses of high streets. I mean, John, how does that work with what you were talking about? Because obviously you, as a transport engineer, you are putting in place those kind of long-term strategies. I mean, is the short-term sort of idea a practical one, do you think?
It is a practical one. It's not necessarily short-term, it's just suck it and see. It might be relatively long-term. Royal College Street in Camden is being dug up at the moment, and actually what's going back there are some just basically improved cycle tracks. They're very good cycle tracks, but they're separated from the main carriageway. They will be basically by some planters and some little things that could be taken out tomorrow, or made more solid in due course. It's fairly cheap. It looks a lot nicer than just for traffic engineers. The standard thing used to be a great big lump of timber with red and white stripes on the side of things. But they're cheap and they can last long. Sorry, they can be and you can find out what's going on. One of the key things is you'll get lots of shock and horror, especially if you're taking space away from motor cars very often. And you never get the chance to, well, let's try it. There's something else we're doing down in Southampton where they're planning to do exactly that. Take some capacity away and let's see what happens.
Okay, and do you think there's a role for designers in designing more homes in city centres and getting more density so you can sort of reduce some of those transport movements as well? I mean, does that have to be part of the solution to sort of solving these problems of sort of having lots of people in the public realm making
just
journeys?
Very quickly on that, I think one of the key things I thought was that idea about the short distances we travel. The shorter the distances we need to travel for what we need to travel, the more easy it is to do that by public transport, by car or by bike. So yes, the closer people are to where they work, I love the idea of actually working more on the high street, whatever that might be. If those distances become shorter between where you live and where you work or wherever else you go, the better that will be.
Paula, do you want to comment on that?
I think one of the issues around, you mentioned short-term uses. I think we often, particularly in this country, we design buildings for one particular use, so residential or retail or commercial development. So you're either going to have an office, a home or a shop. What you see in other countries is much greater flexibility as cities change and develop and evolve over time, is you design buildings which have a lot more greater flexibility. So there's a scheme in Malmö in Sweden, for example, which is really fascinating because what they've done is they've designed buildings and units at ground level, and at the point in time at which that development is completed, there weren't enough people living in that area to warrant any shops because there wasn't enough people spending any money. So those ground floor were used on a 2-year tenancy for people to live at ground floor level. 2 years later, their tenancies come up for renewal. Enough people are now living in the area. They moved them into shops. There was enough flexibility to be able to do that. A number of years on, some of those premises have now turned into restaurants and cafes and so on. Because at the start, when they were designing them with kind of long-term flexibility in mind. And I think we often think, well, this is going to be the way things are always. And if we think more, I suppose, open about how places may evolve and change over time, then we can have those short-term uses without it causing the kind of type of levels of expenditure that Patricia was talking about.
Well, and of course, two of London's most popular tourist attractions at the moment, the Millennium Dome and the Ferris wheel. I can't remember what it's, London Eye, that's it. I mean, they both started out as temporary use and then they've become sort of permanent fixtures, so it shows how it can work. We've got about 10 minutes. We do have a question. Excellent. If it's for any particular member of the panel, then make that known as well,
really.
please.
What about live-work units? Would that not be an option?
Do you mean for high streets or?
High streets, in sort of suburban areas where the bulk of the high street is losing the retailers, and you end up getting wall-to-wall cafeterias or chicken bars.
I'm not an expert on live-work units. Other than that, I know that when they were popular in the 90s, the councils got themselves tied up in knots over rates and how to pay rates. But I know a number of them are re-looking at them for the fact that they are such an eminently flexible space. So I think increasingly they're going to be important. I'd just like, if I may, to come back very briefly to this notion now of designing for density in the centre, which is with the central London land values as they are at the moment. Unfortunately, the people who will be moving around on foot and bike will largely be quite rich people.
Thank you. Now, I used to work in this borough in the 80s and 90s, and live work was a big thing, especially up some stuff around Stratford. And unfortunately, that was, I think, normally used as a dodge where people really wanted to put housing in parts of the borough that had been actually designated in land use terms for employment. And it never terribly seemed to work. And I think what we are understanding is that's not necessarily, people don't necessarily want to stay in their same building to get up and just go upstairs and downstairs. Actually, they want to meet. And I think the future for living and working is a little bit, is still local, but it comes back to something that Paula was saying, this idea of actually you can go out, but you can go to places. People work in Nero these days, it seems. Now, we may not like the brand or we may not like that. And there is something about, flipping that, another coffee shop. And yet they're popular, people meet. If we get away from the fact that it's just another one of those, these are places that people seem to like to go to. And they are, you'll find a lot these days. It looks a little bit soulless sometimes, all these coffee shop tables and people with their laptops flipped up. But that's how people are working increasingly, meeting and chatting and stuff like that. So I think the future perhaps for that kind of local live work isn't in the same building necessarily, and there have been challenges that, but that idea that you can go, and perhaps hubs somewhere which seem to be becoming quite important, especially near stations, where there are places a little bit like a Regis, something like that, where you can go and you can just rock up on the day and take a desk, and other people will be doing likewise. You can arrange to have meetings there and things.
I had visited Canada a couple of years ago, and there was an area in Toronto that where they had sort of little shops, quirky shops of craft varieties, where people would either live in their apartments above and work down below, or travel in. But something like that would be quite, in sort of niche areas, perhaps quite nice. Well,
actually, going back to what Paul was just saying about Malmo, that idea of the thing at ground level, all right, it could be within your building, but actually maybe it's not in another part of your apartment and part of the duplex where you've got your office, but actually it is just down below, and several people in your development have as well. That would sound quite attractive to me, quite frankly. But
Great. Do you want to add anything, or should we?
No, that's okay. We can move on.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yes, we have a couple more hands going up.
I found.
Trisha just asked if you could say who you are and what you do as well.
Okay.
Just so.
I'm a lighting designer, and in terms of the safety in the street, I think it's hard to find the way as a foreigner. Then I think using smartphone to find the venue is really useful. What do you think of using a smartphone to get wayfinding properly?
Sorry. The question was
using smartphone to find your way. I think it's a good solution for foreigners. What do you think of it? Because the city lacks of diversity in the street.
Yeah, they're trialling this in a number of cities around the world, and I think it's quite fantastic. One of the things that's happened within London is you may see that on various different, you might be better to talk about this, Patricia, but a number of street corners, there's a map and it will tell you where you where you are, called Legible London. And I believe that the idea is that over the long term that they will in time have sensors within them that will allow you to then kind of blip and see where you are on your phone. But there are other cities that are way ahead of where we are, where you can just navigate yourself around the city very easily. And I do think that this is a way of which we can actually bring our cities alive. The danger that we need to be mindful of is that we don't create cities where everybody just walks around like this with their face in their mobile phone all the time. And I think that's something that we need to think about in terms of how attractive the public realm is, because where it is just a bit boring and you're just walking around looking at your phone, people do that and they walk into each other and lampposts and cars and everything. But where it is an exciting, vibrant place, you find that people don't do that quite so much. So when we're thinking about the design of our cities moving forward, I think that we have to think about how people use their mobiles, because otherwise we're missing a huge part of what a lot of people spend a lot of time doing.
Thank you. Legible London, Paula referred to as my baby, and my ambition of that was to give people the confidence to get lost, safe in the knowledge they could be found again. But we always wanted it to be a multi-platform use, so with new technology as well as the signboards. But also, I think cities need to be designed to help you to go into places in a natural way through sight lines and things like that. And lighting, you play a really important part in that. So lighting is really important.
I like maps.
Excellent. That's the kind of contribution we're after. So we had another question down the front, did you? Or is it gone? No.
I was just thinking.
Okay, I can jump in and ask one of my
there
own.
Is, you were talking about New York City, and New York City they force their developer to give public places within their building, which is not something that London does. Because they like to have the crossover between buildings. The problem of New York is the congestion of the street by pedestrian, and therefore you have a secondary street which is within the building. Now, and some of those places, that's where you can have your internet, but you also have your cafe, and it's a public space, which we started to do in certain places in London, but Oxford Street is certainly one of the obvious ones where you do need to have a lot more. And I think every development, instead of having 100% retail, should have an internal public space.
I agree. I think New York is very different, though, because you have block-side building, and the only way people can get from one side of a block to another is through the buildings, and that's what part of the developer contributions is the public plazas. I think, however, let's have a coffee to talk about this in one of two places: the Angel Building, which is the Derwent London building, which is a entirely public space which you can sit in and use their Wi-Fi, or Central St Giles, which again you can use public space. I think one of my little campaigns is that we need to develop a little symbol that says public space. We hide our public space at the moment, so let's do a campaign.
Great, okay.
Just a little bit thing, there is also a concern about that, which is actually a lot of public space is private. And I think there's a real concern about privatisation of the public space and the controls that can happen. Now, I look at a lot of places. Liverpool 1 is a really fascinating example. People say, look, half of the old city centre is now a big shopping centre where somebody with a peak cap can tell me to stop doing stuff. And yeah, that's possibly true, but if it weren't for the investment that came through that developer there, it would still be a pretty crap piece of a fine old city. So I think we do have to think about new ways in which they're doing it. So the idea, as Pat's saying, of being able to encouraging people to use privately owned public space is great, but we do need to know about it better. I've been to the Aylesbury building, it's very nice, but I've only been there for a meeting. I didn't know I could just rock in. So that kind of thing about how it becomes, going back to the previous question, how does that become part of the public realm in a way that's easily understood by anybody is a real challenge if it's inside a building.
Great, okay. It's almost 5 now, so we've probably got time for one more quick question if anyone has one. Brilliant, brilliant. That's helped my timekeeping. The fact that no one has. I mean, there's loads of interesting issues here. I mean, we haven't managed to get on to sort of one of my big things, which is about sort of changing demographics and how sort of public spaces are going to sort of have to change for that. Sort of ageing populations and all that. I mean, do you have any sort of quick thoughts do you also want to share on those issues and the challenges cities are going to face?
When we did the Jan Gale study in 2003, he pointed out that there were very few people below 15 and very few people over 60 using central London's principal shopping streets because it was a hostile environment. So actually finding those places where you can sit, where you can get water fountains, where you can just be comfortable in those public-private plazas, I think it's fundamental to signal that people are thought about and respected, and making provision for everybody of every demographic and age. Yeah.
I'd go slightly beyond that as well. It's not just about age, it's just about diversity generally, which is a space like the one you can see in this picture here. That's great for those people at that time. One of the things we're really bad at doing comes back to my general thesis about urban streets and spaces. They're astonishingly complex places. You think about your local high street and what you require from it. It changes depending on your mode, the time of day, what you're doing. It's changing all the time, and that's just you. For me, I can't design my high street for me, let alone the rest of you and everybody else. It's a real challenge, but we need to try. So if we think about a shopping street that is just for shopping, what happens at 6 o'clock? In the suburbs when it shuts down, it's dead. It's roller shuts and tumbleweed. We need to be really thinking about not just about different age groups, but how different types of people with different types of requirements and needs will want to and might reasonably want to use the space at any given time. It is astonishingly complex, but I think we have to embrace it, because if we try and just keep it nice and simple, we'll find monocultural uses, things just shut down, things don't work for certain users at different times. I love the challenge, but it is one, definitely.
I'll just give you perhaps a little bit of an anecdote. Last year on my local high street, we sought to see whether or not we could get all types of different people who lived in the local area to visit it during the course of one day, and had a series of activities, primarily. I think that's telling us to go. So.
Just mouth along to that.
You best hope this is a good point I'm going to make. Hey, what we did is we had a series of different activities. So we had some sort of theatre type productions. But one of the fascinating things is we got. I'm just going to speak over her. There we go. Anyway, one of the things I think that was quite interesting was that people who were of an older generation found out about those activities because they saw the signs in the shop windows. We had a local music artist who's around about 17 years old come on and do a set at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 2 minutes before he started, there was not one single person on that street under the age of 25. By the time he started, there were 200. The power of people's mobile phones to connect up everybody in the neighbourhood, to get them there at the point at which he started rapping in the middle of our high street, was amazing. So I think there's something not just about how we design places, but also what we do in them and how we communicate to people about what's happening them, and that's different across different demographics.
That's brilliant. I don't think we have time for anything else, or we'll have to use this space for other uses and sleep on the beds or something. So just remains me to say thank you to all our panellists, and if you could show your appreciation.